Realm coverage of the second annual Dogman and Cryptid conference here in White Settlement, Texas, being put on by our good friends at the Paranormal Round Table. We have with us right now Jason Mclean from Jason Mclean Questions Everything. Welcome back to the show, bud.
Hey, always glad to be here, man.
I met you, it was Southeast Texas Bigfoot Roadshow, I believe, was the first one.
I think so. Yeah, I think that was the first time we met.
Yeah,
it's been a bit.
It's been a journey since then. It's been great to see so many shows like this pop up, crop up, communities like this be able to get together. How have things been going with you on your show and everything else?
Oh, everything's great. Just questioning everything.
Yeah. Well,
a little bit of a plug there. No, other than that, having fun.
Well, let's get into a little bit of Dogman, cryptids, things like that. What first got you into the topic of Dogman?
So Dogman just sort of fell into everything else, right? You're on the journey, and so it just sort of melded in, right? Because when I started all this, Dogman wasn't really a thing in the popular zeitgeist. It just started peeking out into the popular conversation. So for a while, I was sort of among the early people who were, well, it's probably just misidentified Sasquatch, but then you start getting more of the stories, right? And then you get Beast of Bray Road, and you're like, oh, this is something else entirely. So it's like I was already kind of in, and then it's one of those things where as it surfaced, you're like, I got to figure out what's going on with this as well.
Yeah, and I recently watched, of course, Dogman Triangle. It was great to see them put that together with all the Texas sightings, things like that. I knew that there were quite a few sightings in Texas. I did not realize that it was to that extent until I watched the documentary. I had been talking about it with numerous cryptozoologists. The topic of conversation comes up. I see it in communities all the time. But it was one of those like, wow, there's really a lot.
Yeah.
There are quite a few.
There's a lot. And it's one of those things where even the triangle is sort of a misnomer, obviously. It's one of the, but it's the popular, you can't have the Texas trapezoid or dodecahedron.
Yeah.
That
would be cool.
It would be cool, though. But the thing is, it's been here, the phenomenon's been here for a while. And so it's not necessarily a newer phenomenon. Like it's easy to get the impression that this is a new phenomenon, but it's really not. I mean, look at Tex, right?
Yeah.
My compatriot over at Texas Front Porch, like he had his sighting 40 years ago, right? Yeah. Like this is not necessarily something that's brand new, like Slender Man or whatever. It's got its own history, and it is one of those questions that you do need to take seriously if you're going to really take the idea of cryptozoology seriously in general. You've got to at least address it and figure it out and say, well, where does this all fit?
Yeah, precisely. And, I mean, of course, we'll be having Ryan Edwards on later. I love chatting with him about the scientific pursuit of cryptozoology and the concepts behind this. It was great to hear Josh earlier in his opening remarks talking about the fact that, same thing that we've talked about, perhaps some of this is another entity that is using tropes that we are comfortable with.
Yes, and I think that's something we do need to consider. Again, just to deviate to Bigfoot for 2 seconds, my current paradigm is I think there is a very small population of naturally occurring biological entities.
Yes.
But then you have the vast majority of these other sightings. And I think once you kind of just stop and say, let's take the name off of things and just see what are people actually seeing, not what's said is seen.
Yeah.
Right? Because folklore is not the phenomena. We tend to confuse the two. It's like, well, this is what the folklore says, or this is what the mythology is. And it's like, stop. That's what people think about it. It's not what the thing itself is.
Yeah.
And you realize there's a much larger paranormal side to all of this. And then you throw Dogman in, and it's like, okay, where Sasquatch you have archaeological, paleontological evidence of a creature that matches a Bigfoot description. You don't really have that with Dogman. And there's so much other high strangeness surrounded with Dogman even from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Again, my favorite story is in Beast of Bray Road with the night watchman. It turns to him and says Gadara and walks away, right? That is a reference to the location where Jesus casts out demons. It's like it's essentially telling you what it is in a way. And I've got so many stories from all over the world. It's everything's fine, everything's groovy, smoke or fog rolls in, the creature just walks, looks around, turns around, and walks. And you're like, and then the fog rolls out. You're like, well, what the heck is that? It's like I think as much as, don't get me wrong, I would love for everything to be physical because in a way that's less creepy.
Sure.
But I think when you're dealing with something like a Dogman, I have to admit at this point, I'm just like, I don't think we're dealing with a naturally occurring biological entity. I think we are dealing with something paranormal.
It certainly seems to be the case, especially once you really start digging into sightings and things like that. It is very, very much more the case of dealing with something supernatural and whether it's the fact of we are bringing that with us or that it occupies that space and you happen across it, one of the two. But it's really interesting to see the encounters that people have and some of the, like you said, things like mist, things like that.
Yeah. Or they're speaking, or it's mind speak, or they just disappear, right? They just vanish, or they leave no trace. Or, again, I think the thing is we often tend to think paranormal, that means it can't be physical. But we do have physical evidence of some of these things from time to time. They do. But just like every paranormal thing, I think it's
paranormal's just outside of the norm.
Exactly.
It's just not what you see every day. That's
correct. 100%. And I think this is one of those things where, a lot of us, when we started off, all of this is like, okay, so cryptids are just unknown animals. And certainly that's true for some of them. But the problem is the longer you're like, no, you can't have that paradigm anymore for everything. There has to be that larger paranormal phenomena. We live in a supernatural world. And at some point you have to address that's what's going on here, and I think Dogman is a great example of.
I think it's a prime example
of what we're talking about.
Very, very much, and especially putting it in light of what is going on currently in the world of UFO UAP study, the recent Grush testimony that I know my audience is probably tired of hearing me talk about, but. Much like pennies in a hammer, I will slam sense into your head.
Yes.
And the use of that term, non-biological, so absolutely important, so incredibly important, because as we said at the MUFON conference, it's the fact of that now removes the box.
Yeah.
When you are saying, look at this alien craft, well, number one, you haven't proved aliens.
Correct.
Number two, you can't prove that is the source of that craft, even if you proved aliens.
Yep.
So it's like you're putting it in a box now, no different than the scientists who said, we don't need to look at that because it doesn't fit in science's box.
100%. No, 100%. And like you said, I do a show with Dr. Dean Bertram. One thing, he's a true Fordian. He's like, I don't think science is even capable of grasping what we're dealing with. I'm slightly more optimistic.
I think so.
But I think I think the problem is where we draw lines. Like, I'm not certain that we have the technology to understand everything or understand the way we understand ourselves, this pen. But that doesn't mean we can't know. By the way, I love the Sharpie.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. Branding. I love it. But it doesn't mean we can't say there is a phenomena. These are things that are indicating that it's a real phenomena. Now, what does real mean in this situation? I think that's sort of like, well, that's where we've drawn our own boxes. Hundreds of years ago, people looked and for them, reality included the supernatural.
That's
there was
right.
no question of that.
That's right.
And it seems like this is a phenomenon that does seem to alter and change itself with our culture.
Well, and very much a phenomena that harkens back, like lycanthropy, the idea of, King Lycan, that's ancient Greece.
Yeah.
Like that is a story from ancient Greece that spread to Europe and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So these are stories that go back, and especially when you're talking folklore. We have a folklorist here that we'll be getting on the show, Ron Murphy. And when you're talking folklore, it's fantastic to talk about it because, especially one of the things that was covered in the movie, the Dogman Triangle, which I thought was great, was the actual cultures of the area where it moved. Like, I am Cajun. We're French of descension. We have the Rougarou.
Yeah.
It is the lupine creature that stalks in the swamps and comes after people who are unjust. Goes right back to
Gévaudan.
Exactly. And the fears of that were real fears. Like people were dying. There was no question. Like, oh, I don't think that eviscerated corpse was a real thing. Like that was a real thing.
It was a real thing.
People were
real
scared to hell.
Yeah, it's a real body count. This was as real as anything else, and it does also beg the question, because there are a few events like that we've looked into where you're like, this is ruled a cat attack, and it's like, but this doesn't look like a cat attack on people, right? It's like that's weird, and it's not the same kind of injuries. It begs the question: if we do have these accounts throughout history of supernatural, preternatural entities attacking and killing humans, why would that have stopped?
Yeah.
And is it, again, you talk about, the Rougarou, these things go all the way back. Just as not La Llorona, of course, La Lechuza.
Yes.
That's a 1-to-1 parallel with the Harpies of Greece, right? Yeah. And I will never pronounce that name correctly for the creature that's in Peru. Yeah, is it Peru? No, not Peru. Papua New Guinea. Now again, they're like, but that one's a bat. But that's a bat-like creature. Well, but stop. It is a female night creature, right? Flying night creature. We have a lot of the same themes, right? About who it attacks, what it attacks, how it operates. Goat Man goes all the way back, right? You got your satyrs, you got your shahadim, you got your leshy. We have goat. All of these things go back as far back as humans. That's the end of the conversation. Like, I'm sorry, these things are real. Dogman's a part of this weird milieu. Now, the question is,
good verbiage.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I knew you would get it. But the question then becomes: what is a Dogman when we are not looking at it?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Are we dealing with werewolves and they're transforming from humans into something? Is it something supernatural, has a completely different form, and that's the form it either chooses to take or we allow it to take?
Well, and especially whenever you're talking traditionally werewolf, folklore, things like that, that is a chosen transformation. That is a transformation that you have put yourself through either magical means, sacrificial means, something like that. It's not necessarily like, sure, a werewolf can bite you and you can turn into one, I guess. But that's much more modern. That's much more of a modern interpretation. Exactly. Kind of like the whole silver with vampires,
right?
That just came because they couldn't see themselves in the mirror.
Yeah, it's a derivation of. All folklore is a derivation. Well, and even like the Eastern European werewolf legends, where a lot of this stuff comes from, is like they didn't even really transform initially.
Yes,
and in a lot of ways, they're almost a 1-to-1 parallel to the Wendigo, as far as when you actually look at the. Now, of course, you have the modern artwork which shows them with branch antler things on their heads, and it's like that's not the original story. But you get back to the original stories, like it's way more complicated. And I think that's the problem, is we get so caught up with what is seen on these things. It's like
even when you look at that, even when you look at the phenomenology of Wendigo and the stories behind that, like you're saying, the modern interpretation is far different from the classical folklore interpretation. That is because the settlers that came had tradition of this other. Yeah. They had tradition of werewolf and things changing and all that kind of stuff. So the two things melded together.
As it always
ended up happening.
Yeah, that's what it always does. Like you
end up with an amalgamation.
And the thing is, sometimes these things change with us, which goes back to what does it look like when we are not looking at it? It's entirely possible none of these things actually look like what we see them as. Like, it could be that we're co-creating them with our own minds. It could be choosing a form.
It could be the case. I had a great example that somebody put up at MUFON during our coverage at MUFON that I will continue to use till I am no longer. And that is the idea of three-dimensional objects cast a two-dimensional shadow.
Yes.
Fourth-dimensional objects cast a three-dimensional shadow.
Yes.
It was like, wow. That is poignantly and very simply put.
Yeah.
Because we know there is a fourth dimension. Like
there's 11
know
as far as we know.
And
maybe
that's
more.
just it. Like,
Yeah.
And even to get into that understanding of, there is a huge soap suds of a world out there that we are just one bubble in the ripple of suds in the tub of the universe, man. And we are connected minusculely with those other, and frequently, if you look at the suds in a sink or a tub, you'll see 2 or 3 pop and they become bigger.
Yep. No, 100%.
And that's quite literally what we're looking at right now. Like, things around us are popping, and our view of reality is expanding.
It is. And the question then becomes, right, we used to know this. This used to be common knowledge in a way. It's like all we've done when I hear people talk about simulation theory, parallel dimensions.
Yeah.
I'm like, congratulations, you've caught up with 4,000 years of religious tradition.
Yep.
And the thing is, we sort of abandoned all of these lines of thought about a century ago because we were like, no, we're actually a little bit more than that. Because we're rationalists now. We're scientists now. We can blow things up now. That makes us better. And it's like, hold on, pump the brakes there, Skippy. Just not everything fits under a microscope, and that's the issue that we're now facing. Is we now got to the point where we can't deny. It was easy to say, no, that Farmer John's just crazy, or that guy's drunk. Now everyone can talk and like, yeah, we can't get rid of this stuff anymore. It's real. We have to deal with it, and it's outside of a flesh and blood paradigm. Yeah,
no, precisely. And we are just coming to the point technologically to detect, see things from these sides. Even the conversation of how experiencers of UFO and UAP are physically changed.
Oh, yeah.
And the way I've been putting it is no different than if I took a natural magnet and brought it near this mechanical watch. It doesn't have to touch the watch. It just has to be in proximity.
Yeah.
And the gears in that watch will be forever changed.
Yep. 100%.
And no different, like if you were in the physical presence of something that is using that realm of technology to cloak itself, to defy gravity, things like that, you are talking about a high vibrational field, and it would be no different than going and standing in front of a friggin' radio transmitter at a radio station, which always says, do not stand near transmitter.
Yeah, no, people die. I mean, people die from that stuff. And that's, I mean, this, again, that's the reality. The reality is there's something there. Now, the problem is, what is it objectively? Well, we don't necessarily have the ability to objectively observe it all. And it is very much a phenomenon that seems to interact with this on its own terms. Like, it knows, it was Norio Hayakawa who points out it's always just out of frame. It's always just here. It's like, that's a level of control and deliberate action that should scare the ever-living crap out of us, because it means it's fully aware of itself.
It is at least aware of the observer.
Yes, more.
No different than any atom that you take a picture of.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's no way to predict the path of an atom. There's no way to predict the path of an electron. But for some reason, you can take a picture of it. Because it's aware that it's being observed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's weird. Yeah. But that's the whole thing, right? It's like the universe is just weirder than we want it to be. John Keel pointed out, like, during these, he points out, it's like, objectively, if we could objectively observe this phenomena, right, what would you actually see? And that's where the question is, how much of this is even occurring on the psychic plane of existence?
Yeah.
Like, that's the problem, is we don't know. But I love the fact that we don't necessarily know, right? Now, there's things we can know, which is that it's real, right? And that there's observable facts. There's things that we can deal with. But I do love the fact that there's a mystery here. Yeah. I think too many people they're like, no, I want it locked down. I want to be able to put it, give it its Latin scientific. It's like, that's not what it is. Well, deal with the mystery. Deal with the bigness of it.
Well, what you get into at that point is the fact of the concreteness of time.
Yeah.
For prime example, like, time is a part of so many equations. However, time is not a static thing. It's not like the law of gravity. It's not like the law of motion.
Yeah, some of that has loopholes too.
Some of that has loopholes as well. But time is fully a construct that we came up with, and we said 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour, this many hours to a day. Like, that is a fully agreed upon across the world calculation.
Yeah.
To think that anybody coming from another dimension, from another planet, from another time, has the same concept of time.
Yeah.
Or even the same rule of time.
Yes.
Because it's just a rule. It's a rule that we have given it that, hey, you feel free to break it anytime you want.
Well, let me put one caveat on there, right?
Please.
Our delineation and measurement is of something that we objectively observe,
sure.
Right? But to your higher point, and we see this again as a Christian, I do come from that perspective.
I know.
We see throughout the Old Testament, God speaks backwards as far when He uses certain tenses and things, and this is even noted by the prophets themselves. Textual experts and the rabbinic scholars have talked about this for years. He is indicating that time is not the same for Him. That's the entire point. It's like, yes, we have an observable, like, time is what it is.
Created in 7 days. On whose time scale?
Right.
On whose time scale?
Correct. And the thing is, it says 1,000 years is a day is 1,000 years. The entire point is time is irrelevant in that realm of the universe. Yeah. The thing is, it's applicable to us. It ain't applicable to them.
Yeah.
At all. And it's because
nor is it necessary.
It's not necessary. Again, he's entirely outside of time. Well, so that means also all of those other entities are as well.
Even us. The only thing relative to time for us is this.
Yeah,
my man.
The corporeal. The corporeal stuff.
Us, what we are, what we intrinsically are, like, we're going to be hanging out 2,000 years from now, bro.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hip.
And maybe 2,000 years ago. I mean,
I would tend to think so, the way we get along. But you know, it is a mind-numbing concept, and you really do have to be willing to step outside of that constructed box that we have all agreed upon to live in, and understand the fact that no, we have all agreed that this is what is. That it doesn't mean it is what is,
and you can't question it.
Doesn't mean that this is a marker. I said this is a marker, and you said nice marker.
Yep.
Thanks. It's a marker now. Like, aside from that, it is a semblance of electrons. I could assemble these same atoms and probably get a friggin' hamburger.
Yeah.
If I assembled them differently.
Yeah.
You know, like,
let me know when you can do that.
Things.
We
made matter out of light 2.5 years ago. We are 3 steps away from replicator. Give me an espresso.
Yeah.
Coffee black. You know, we are not far away from these things that seemed science fiction at one point. You know, like the idea of a replicator was like, what? Okay, come on, dude. Again, we are pretty close to it.
With the, again, official exception of, like, true teleportation and warp drive. Everything else that we see in even Star Trek: The Next Generation,
even warp drive.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, officially, right, but. Look at what we have.
Yeah.
Half the stuff that we handle is better than what we were watching in Star Trek Deep Space Nine or The Next Generation. I don't even want to talk about Voyager.
Just look at where you were at with what's in your pocket from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Just from 10 years ago, where it was literally, you could A, B, C, D, E.
I remember.
Single, and man, I see people still rock that, like old folks. It's like, dude, look at them go, man. They're like, they're pros. But we, at one point in life, Jason, we had to ride a bike to the library.
Yes.
And look it up, and it may be a microfiche. It might be in a microfiche, and then it may not be available at your library. You may have to order it from the downtown library or something like that, and wait for it to come in. And that realm of information is now immediacy.
Yes,
it is immediately available.
As long as the overlords want you to have it.
Sure. And,
that little thing, but, we work with what we have.
And that's a different equation in and of itself. But we have to be ready to accept the fact that we are in a roiling pot right now. It is no longer a tumbling boil. It's no longer a simmer. We are at a roiling point of society, of technology, of spirituality. and it has been a long time in the history of humanity since all three of those things have been welling up at the same time. So we are right up against a beautiful, beautiful awakening of people and concepts and topics like this, where even hearing a room full of folks be willing to accept that we may be dealing with a spiritual entity that is stalking around in woods and trying to interact with people.
Yeah,
that's
its own agenda. For its own agenda.
It's not just its own agenda.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is one of those things that we need to really, again, understand. Is I think we make too many assumptions on all sides. Right. It's like, well, the Dogman is like, stop. You don't know. You need to. We need. It's like, well, the lore. Stop. That's important, but it's not what it is. Well, I saw this. Great, but what is it when you're not looking at it?
Yeah.
What if it looks like a goat man to somebody else? What if it looks like a Bigfoot to somebody else? What if it looks like a flying
What about the cases
monster?
where you see it and your buddy with you doesn't?
Exactly.
That is the one that we bring up all the time. There is more than one time. Much like any situation being brought up in a household, me and my brother were brought up by the same single mom with 2 jobs that went to college, but we both have a different experience in that household.
Yes, 100%.
No different than me and you traipsing through the woods, me seeing a Bigfoot and you not seeing it. And we are directly there together.
Yep. 100%.
And there is more than one case like that. Quite a few cases like that.
I've had that happen with me. Like again, when we're out there researching in Brown Springs, like we have stuff like that where it's like stuff doesn't happen to me, it happens to them. It is the nature of our universe is more complicated than we've allowed ourselves to believe for the last century.
And some of that may even be because the one thing I keep bringing up, like all of this, how put off. If you are listening, dude, telling you, man, I quote you more than anything. It all goes back to the original work of remote viewing and the fact of when those dudes go home and they're thinking like, did I put too much sodium hydroxide in that? And I hope I didn't put 1 mil too much. They are actively affecting their experiment in the lab.
Yeah.
They through strange, what we now know as quantum entanglement, are affecting the thing by thinking about it. So you going into something dispassionately, the way that you go into it and going, this is what I'm going for. I'm not going to get psyched. I'm not going to get amped. I'm not going to do my spiritual dance before I go out and do it. Because when you do that, you're actively not only charging yourself, you're charging where you're going. You are charging the intent.
You are creating creating a pathway.
You don't have to have a Ouija board. You could have a blank piece of paper, and if you're trying to use it the same way as a Ouija board, you'd be surprised at the results.
Yes.
Because it's the intent, not the object.
Thank you, because I'm right there with you. A lot of people are like, well, can I do this versus I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do? What is the purpose? Purpose is behind everything.
Yeah.
And that's really where a lot of this, again, that's where I go back to. It's like, hold on.
If the power of intention, man, the intention of it.
It's like if you're not dealing with, again, cows, deer, if you're dealing with something that belongs in that other realm, that belongs behind that veil, it's affecting you, you're affecting it, and we need to approach it with a lot more restraint and perhaps guard than a lot of people do. And I think there's, again, if we could take that step back and objectively observe things, I think we'd find a lot more damage is happening to people because they're approaching this subject frivolously.
There is a lot of flippancy. There is a lot of flippancy. It reminds me of friends that would go out and just get acid to use on a Wednesday night and then wonder why they had a bad experience.
Yeah.
Things like that. And it's like, well, did you prepare yourself properly for that experience? Did you, before you went out there, did you ground yourself? Did you try to remove those thoughts from your mind? Did you try to, keep yourself as dispassionate as possible? Because as soon as you get passionately involved in that way, you are now coloring any evidence. You're now coloring your own experience, all kinds of things. So we open more doors than close windows sometimes.
Yes,
with those situations.
100%.
Man, thanks so much for taking the time. Everybody just got out of Lyle Blackburn's talk.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you go man your table. Let everybody know where they can go to follow your show, where they can go to follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, man.
Chris, always a pleasure to be on Curious Realm. And again,
Absolutely.
Jason Mclean Questions Everything on YouTube, Rumble, but we're doing lives on YouTube again, and again, Facebook.
Cool.
And it's Siru Papers is the official name on Twitter.
Awesome.
It's X now, so
Yes,
whatever.
yes, on the X.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
thanks again, bud. I
Appreciate you, man.
appreciate it. While you are online checking out everything from Jason Mclean Questions Everything, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is where you can go follow, like, subscribe, share, all that kind of good stuff. That is where you can go and find our Knowledge Vault. That is where you can also find our Experiencer page. If you're an experiencer of the paranormal, had a cryptid encounter with UFOs, aliens, if you were a government whistleblower, stop on by CuriousRealm.com/story. Let us know your story. Leave us your evidence. We will present it to our experts and see what answers we can get you. Stay tuned after these messages, folks. We'll be right back with our continuing coverage of the second annual Dogman and Cryptid Conference right here in White Settlement, Texas from Paranormal Round Table. Right after this.